I pulled off the highway just after midnight, the glow of my car's dashboard lighting up the emptiness around me. The road ahead was swallowed by fog, and my gas gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. I didn't want to stop. I hate small towns. They're too quiet, too dark, like they're hiding something. But I didn't have a choice. That's when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Fairhaven. Population 476. Beneath it, a hand-painted board read, "Visitors, please check in at the sheriff's office." I muttered under my breath, "That's new," as I rolled past it, my tires crunching on gravel. The town looked like it had been plucked straight out of an old postcard. Rows of wooden buildings, faded signs swinging in the breeze, and a single dim street lamp casting long shadows on cracked sidewalks. But there wasn't a soul in sight, not even a stray dog. My headlights caught a small building with a flickering neon sign, "Sheriff's Office." I parked out front, the engine ticking as it cooled. Something about the stillness made me uneasy, but I shook it off. Inside, the office smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and mildew. A fan in the corner turned lazily, barely disturbing the heavy air. A man in his late 50s sat behind a desk, his hat tilted low over his face. He didn't look up right away, so I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound polite. "I'm just passing through. My car's almost out of gas. Is there a station nearby?" The sheriff finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You're not planning on staying long, are you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "No," I replied quickly. "Just need enough to make it to the next town." He leaned back in his chair, staring at me for a moment before he spoke again. "Fairhaven doesn't have a gas station." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "and you'll want to be gone before sundown." The way he said it sent a chill through me. "What happens after sundown?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh. The sheriff didn't smile. "Just get back on the road as soon as you can," he said, his tone sharper now. "No one who stays here overnight leaves. Ever." I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I tried to brush it off. "Okay," I said. "Where can I find gas then?" "There's a guy on the edge of town," the sheriff said. "He's got a pump." But his voice trailed off, and he leaned forward, locking eyes with me. "If you hear the church bell ring, don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't open your door." I blinked at him, unsure if he was joking. "Is that supposed to scare me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a map across the desk, pointing to a spot near the outskirts. "That's where you'll find gas," he said firmly. "Now go." Outside, the air felt heavier, colder than before. I climbed back into my car, glancing at the sheriff's office one last time. He was still there, standing in the doorway, watching me like he knew something I didn't. I tried to shake off the unease as I started the engine. But as I drove deeper into Fairhaven, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. The streets were empty, every window dark, and the silence was almost oppressive. And then I heard it, a single distant bell. The bell's sound echoed faintly, distant but unmistakable, as if it was ringing from another world. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and kept my eyes on the road ahead. The sheriff's warning played in my mind on repeat. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't open your door. The road wound through the darkened town, past more shuttered windows and dimly lit streets. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog. The eerie stillness felt like it was pressing in on me, watching me. Finally, I spotted the gas station, or what passed for one. It was little more than a shack with a single rusty pump outside. A flickering bulb above the door provided the only light. I pulled up and killed the engine, stepping out into the chilly night air. A man emerged from the shack, his figure obscured by the fog. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. His face came into view, a weathered, gaunt man in his 60s, his eyes sunken but sharp. "You're the one passing through?" he asked, his voice gravelly, almost a whisper. I nodded, suddenly feeling like I needed to justify myself. "Yeah, just needed some gas. The sheriff said you could help me out." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for the pump, his hands steady but deliberate. "Sheriff always sends the strays my way," he muttered. "You planning to stay long?" "No," I said quickly. "Just enough gas to get out of here." He stopped mid-motion, his hand resting on the pump handle, and looked me dead in the eye. "If you want to make it out, you better listen close. There are rules in this town. Break M, and you won't see the highway again." I let out a nervous laugh, hoping he was joking. "Rules? Like what?" He didn't smile. Instead, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it out to me. "Take it. Read it. Follow it." I unfolded the paper, the edges worn and smudged with what looked like grease, or maybe something worse. The handwriting was uneven, scrawled like someone had written it in a hurry. The rules of Fairhaven. Never look at the town clock after midnight. If you hear the bell toll 3 times, do not move until it stops. Keep your windows shut and curtains drawn after dark. Never step into the fog. If you do, you won't come back. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. Is this some kind of prank? Why would anyone? "It's not a joke," he interrupted, his tone flat. "You break the rules, you'll wish you hadn't. And don't think they're there to keep you safe. They're not." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What happens if I don't follow them?" His expression darkened. "You don't want to find out." The pump clicked, signaling the tank was full. He replaced the nozzle and stepped back. "Now go. And remember what I said." I climbed back into my car, clutching the paper tightly. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it was just the cold. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, watching me drive away, his figure fading into the fog. I made it back onto the main road, the paper resting on the passenger seat. The first rule, never look at the town clock after midnight, stuck in my mind. I hadn't noticed a clock, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. What could possibly happen if someone looked at a clock? The bell rang again. This time it was louder, closer. 3 clear, resonant tolls. I froze, gripping the steering wheel as the sound vibrated through the air. The man's warning echoed in my head. "If you hear the bell toll 3 times, don't move until it stops." I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The sound faded, leaving the night eerily silent once again. After what felt like an eternity, I exhaled, my chest tight with tension. When I finally looked up, I saw it. In the fog, just ahead, a figure was standing in the middle of the road. It didn't move. It didn't wave. It just stood there, its shape barely visible in the haze. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse raced as I reached for the paper again, my eyes scanning the rules. The 4th one stood out now, glaring at me like a warning carved in stone. Never step into the fog. If you do, you won't come back. I gripped the steering wheel, my breaths uneven as I tried to calm down. The figure in the fog. Had I imagined it? My eyes darted back to the paper resting on the passenger seat. The rules stared back at me, their meanings pressing heavier on my mind with every passing second. I forced myself to drive on, the car humming softly as the fog thickened around me. The lights of the town seemed to fade behind me, swallowed whole by the gray mist. For a moment, I thought I was finally free of Fairhaven. But then my headlights caught something ahead. A tall metal gate loomed across the road, stretching endlessly into the darkness on both sides. I slammed on the brakes, my heart thudding as the car skidded to a stop. The gate wasn't there before, I was sure of it. I stepped out cautiously, the cold air biting through my jacket. A rusty sign hung crookedly from the gate, swaying slightly in the breeze. "You are not ready to leave." My chest tightened as I stared at the words. Ready? What did that even mean? I walked closer, gripping the bars of the gate, and gave them a shove. They didn't budge. A loud clang echoed behind me, and I spun around, my pulse racing. My car's passenger door was wide open, the rule sheet fluttering on the seat. I was sure I'd shut it. I hurried back, slamming the door and locking it before grabbing the paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it again, searching for answers. The rules hadn't changed, but the warning felt sharper now, more immediate. If you hear the bell toll 3 times, do not move until it stops. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't paranoia. Something was watching me. Something was playing with me. Backtracking, I returned to the main road, driving aimlessly as I tried to think. The sheriff's office seemed like the only place I could get any real answers. The building looked the same as before, dim, quiet, and unwelcoming. I parked and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling faintly. The sheriff was there, leaning over his desk, scribbling something into a ledger. He didn't look up. "I need to know what's going on," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed heavily, finally meeting my eyes. "I told you to leave before sundown. Why didn't you listen?" "I tried," I snapped, holding up the paper. "There's a gate blocking the road. And what's with these rules? What happens if I break them?" The sheriff leaned back, his expression unreadable. "The rules aren't there for you," he said slowly. "They're for the town, to keep it in check." "In check?" I repeated, incredulous. "What does that even mean?" "You don't want to find out," he said, echoing the gas station attendant's words. I felt frustration bubbling over. "Then why not just tell me what happens? What's out there in the fog?" He stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "It's not what's in the fog. It's what the fog keeps inside." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the car, parked near the sheriff's office, gripping the paper tightly as if it could protect me. The town remained deathly silent, and the fog never lifted. Around 3 a.m., I noticed a light flickering in one of the buildings across the street. It was faint, barely visible through the mist, but it drew my attention. I stepped out of the car cautiously, my breath clouding in the cold air, and approached the building. The sign above the door read Town Hall. Its windows were dark and dusty, but the light was coming from deeper inside. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning loudly in the silence. The faint glow led me to a large room filled with old filing cabinets and dusty records. In the center of the room was a desk with a single lamp, its weak bulb flickering. On the desk was another piece of paper. Unlike the rules I'd been given, this one was blank, except for a single line scrawled across the top. "The town chooses who stays." My stomach dropped as I read the words. Before I could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere in the building. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I froze, my mind racing. The sheriff's warning about staying still during the bell's tolls flashed in my mind. Was this the same? The footsteps stopped just outside the room. I could see a shadow under the door. A shape that didn't move, didn't breathe. I clutched the paper tightly, stepping back until my legs hit the edge of the desk. The light flickered more violently now, casting distorted shadows across the room. Then the door creaked open. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate. I pressed myself against the desk, holding my breath as the shadow inched closer. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat echoing louder than the last. The figure stepped into the dim light of the flickering lamp. It wasn't human, or at least not anymore. Its body was distorted, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Empty, hollow eyes scanned the room, their gaze passing right over me. I stayed frozen, my legs trembling under me. The rules. Follow the rules. But there wasn't a rule about this. What was I supposed to do? The creature, or whatever it was, moved to the center of the room, stopping directly beneath the lamp. Its head twitched violently, jerking to one side, then the other, as if it was listening for something. And then it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "You shouldn't be here." I felt a scream rising in my throat, but swallowed it down. My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk as I fought the urge to run. The creature turned slowly, its empty gaze locking onto mine. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just bolted, my shoes pounding against the wooden floor as I tore through the hall. Behind me, I heard the thing shriek, a piercing, unnatural sound that made my skin crawl. Doors slammed open as I sprinted past them, the air around me growing colder with each step. The rules paper crumpled in my fist, now useless as panic took over. I burst through the front door of the town hall, stumbling onto the street outside. The fog was thicker now, swirling like it had a life of its own. My car was nowhere in sight. No. No. The shriek echoed again, closer this time. I turned, my eyes darting through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, but the cold air burned my lungs. I backed away, my legs shaking, until I felt something solid behind me. I spun around. It was the clock. The town clock tower loomed over me, its face glowing faintly in the mist. Midnight. The hands were frozen at 12, but the second hand twitched erratically, as if it was struggling to move. Rule number 1. Never look at the town clock after midnight. I tore my eyes away, but it was too late. A low rumble began to vibrate through the ground beneath me, and the fog thickened even more, wrapping around me like a living thing. The shriek came again, impossibly loud now, and I turned just in time to see the figure emerge from the fog. It moved faster than before, its limbs bending in unnatural ways as it closed the distance between us. I ran again, this time heading toward the sheriff's office. My legs screamed in protest, and my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The door was locked when I reached it. I banged on it desperately, shouting for help. "Sheriff, open the door. Please." The shriek sounded again, closer than ever. I turned, pressing my back against the door, and saw the shadowy figure just a few yards away. Paused, its head tilting as if it was studying me. The door behind me swung open, and I fell backward into the office. The sheriff stood over me, his face pale but calm. Without a word, he slammed the door shut and locked it, turning to face me. "You broke the rules," he said, his voice cold. I didn't mean to," I stammered, clutching the crumpled paper. "I didn't know what to do." The sheriff shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Once the rules are broken, it won't stop until it takes what it wants." "What does it want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Anything that doesn't belong here," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. Before I could respond, the windows rattled violently, and the lights flickered. The fog outside pressed against the glass, distorting the shapes of the shadows moving within it. The sheriff grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back of the office. "There's only one way to stop it now." We entered a small room lined with old cabinets and shelves. At the center was a trapdoor, its edges worn and splintered. "Down there," the sheriff said, pointing to it. "What's down there?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "The heart of the town," he replied. "It's where the rules come from. If you want to survive, you'll have to face it." I hesitated, my mind racing. The shrieks grew louder, the walls of the office shaking as the fog began to seep through the cracks. "You don't have a choice," the sheriff said, his voice firm. I swallowed hard and nodded. Together, we lifted the trapdoor, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that disappeared into the earth. The sheriff handed me a flashlight, his expression grim. "Whatever happens, don't stop moving. And don't look back." I descended the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The air grew colder and heavier with every step, the darkness pressing in around me. At the bottom, I found myself in a cavern lit by a faint, eerie glow. The walls pulsed faintly, like they were alive, and in the center was a massive stone obelisk covered in strange symbols. The shrieks stopped suddenly, replaced by a deafening silence. Then I heard it, a voice, soft and chilling, coming from the obelisk. "You don't belong here." The ground beneath me trembled, and the glow from the obelisk grew brighter. I clutched the flashlight, my body frozen with fear. The voice spoke again, louder this time. "The town must feed." The voice from the obelisk grew louder, filling the cavern with a sound that seemed to seep into my bones. "The town must feed," it repeated, each word carrying a weight that made the air harder to breathe. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the faint beam barely piercing the darkness. The obelisk's glow pulsed faster now, and the symbols on its surface seemed to shift and writhe, as though alive. Behind me, the stairway shook violently, chunks of earth crumbling and falling into the abyss below. Couldn't go back. "Don't stop moving." The sheriff's words echoed in my mind. I stepped forward, my legs trembling, until I was just a few feet from the obelisk. The ground beneath me felt unstable, like it was alive, responding to every movement I made. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum that filled the cavern. The obelisk's glow dimmed for a moment, then flared brighter than ever. The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't from the obelisk. It came from inside my own mind. "You broke the rules. Now you must decide." My breath caught as the cavern shifted around me, and suddenly I wasn't alone. Shadows formed in the flickering light, taking shape into figures. They weren't human, not anymore. Their hollow eyes glared at me, their forms twisted and broken, as if they had been consumed by something unnatural. The voice in my head spoke again. "You can leave, but the town must take someone in your place." I froze, the weight of those words sinking in. The faces of the figures around me twisted into silent screams, their bodies jerking toward me as if pleading for release. "Choose," the voice commanded. The ground beneath me cracked, the glowing light from the obelisk spilling into the fissures. I felt tears streaming down my face as the realization hit me. Someone had to stay behind, for the town, for the rules to hold. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the obelisk, its pulsing light growing dimmer with each passing second. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to escape without condemning someone else. But the rules were clear, and the town wasn't giving me a choice. The sheriff's voice rang in my ears again. "The rules aren't there to protect you. They're for the town." I thought about the sheriff, the gas station attendant, the other souls I'd seen or hadn't seen in the fog. Had they made the same choice? Or were they the ones left behind? The figures around me moved closer, their hollow eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Was it anger? Fear? Resignation? Finally, I spoke, my voice shaking. "Take me." The cavern went silent. The obelisk's glow flickered, then steadied. The figures stopped, their twisted forms frozen in place. The voice returned, softer this time. You have chosen. When I woke, I was lying on the side of the road, just outside the town's border. My car was parked nearby, its engine idling quietly. The fog was gone, replaced by the faint glow of dawn. I stumbled to my feet, my body aching as though I had been crushed under something heavy. My hands were scraped and bloodied, but I was alive. The paper with the rules was gone. The sheriff's office, the gas station, the town itself, nowhere in sight. Just an empty stretch of road behind me. I climbed into the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The moment I turned onto the highway, a wave of relief washed over me. But it didn't last. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something. A shadow, standing at the edge of the road, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I drove away and never thought about Fairhaven again. But the truth is, the town never really lets you go. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of a bell tolling in the distance. And every time I freeze, waiting for it to stop. The fog hasn't returned, but I feel it sometimes, lingering at the edge of my vision. And in my dreams, I see the obelisk, its glow pulsing faintly, waiting for me to break another rule. Fairhaven didn't take me that night, but a part of me stayed behind. And I know one day it'll come back to claim the rest. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.